Story. The old house at the end of Willow Lane was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that comes when laughter has just slipped out the door and the echo of goodbyes still lingers in the air. Margaret sat in her favorite rocking chair, the wooden arms polished smooth from years of use. Her children and grandchildren had left only an hour earlier, their car packed full of suitcases, snacks, and restless excitement. She could still hear the words they had spoken before they drove away. "You're too old to travel with us, Grandma, just watch the house." The words had been said gently, without cruelty, but they still landed like small stones in her heart. She had smiled at them, nodded her head, and agreed. After all, what else could she do? Margaret told herself it was fine. She was used to being left behind. She was 78 years old, her hair silver white, her steps slower than they once had been. She had lived long enough to know that time moves differently for the young. For them, the world was a road waiting to be traveled. For her, it was a memory book, already filled with well-worn pages. Still, when the night grew deep and the house grew still, Margaret felt the ache of silence. The television flickered in the corner, but she barely noticed the sound. Instead, she listened to the clock ticking on the wall, steady and unchanging, as if reminding her of the years she carried on her shoulders. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the wooden floor. Margaret rose early, the way she always had. She brewed her tea, watered her plants, and stepped out onto the front porch. The morning air was crisp, filled with the scent of wet grass and the faint sweetness of blooming roses in the yard. For a moment, she simply stood there, breathing it in. The sky stretched wide and blue, and a small bird hopped across the fence, tilting its head as if to greet her. Margaret smiled at the tiny visitor. And then, without planning it, without thinking at all, she whispered aloud. "What if I don't stay behind this time?" The question startled her, like a voice she hadn't expected to hear. She glanced at the road where her family had driven away the night before. The world beyond the mailbox suddenly seemed larger, more open, more possible than it had in years. She laughed softly at herself. A 78-year-old woman, thinking about adventure. It was foolish. It was impossible, but the thought would not leave her. Margaret went back inside, her eyes drifting over the framed photographs on the mantel. Pictures of her late husband, James, smiling with his arm around her. Pictures of her children when they were small. Pictures of holidays, birthdays, and graduations. Each one carried a story, a reminder of days when she had been part of the adventure. She remembered the long road trips she and James used to take when the children were young. The smell of gasoline at rest stops, the laughter of the kids in the back seat, the way the horizon always seemed to promise something new. A warmth stirred in her chest. She realized she didn't have to stop being part of the adventure just because the years had slowed her steps. That morning, Margaret packed a small bag. Not much. Just her favorite sweater, a book of poetry, her notebook, and a few personal things. She wrote a note for her family, in her careful handwriting. "I've gone for a little journey of my own. Don't worry, I'll be safe. Love, Grandma." She placed the note neatly on the kitchen table, then locked the door behind her. Margaret didn't go far at first. She walked to the corner where the old bus stop still stood. The bench was worn and the paint was chipped, but when the bus pulled up, she climbed aboard with a steady determination. The driver gave her a curious look. "Where to, ma'am?" Margaret hesitated only a moment before answering. "Downtown. To the station." Her voice felt stronger than it had in years. As the bus rumbled down the familiar streets, Margaret watched the world roll by. Children raced on bicycles. Neighbors trimmed their hedges. The bakery on the corner opened its doors, releasing the smell of fresh bread into the air. Everything looked brighter, as if she were seeing it with new eyes. At the station, Margaret bought a train ticket. She didn't overthink it. She didn't plan every detail. She simply chose a destination she remembered from long ago, a seaside town she and James had visited once, many summers back. The train ride was slow and steady, the kind of travel Margaret remembered fondly. She sat by the window, letting the rhythm of the wheels soothe her. Fields stretched out in waves of green and gold, broken only by the occasional farmhouse or winding river. A young couple sat across from her, whispering to each other, full of excitement for their trip. Margaret smiled at them, though she did not interrupt. She didn't need to join their conversation. Simply being there, part of the world's movement again, was enough. Hours passed gently, and when the train finally pulled into the small seaside town, Margaret felt a quiet thrill. The air smelled of salt and seaweed. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the breeze. She walked slowly through the streets, each step careful but full of purpose. The town was just as she remembered. Narrow lanes, whitewashed houses, small shops selling seashells and postcards. At the end of the road, the ocean stretched wide and endless, glittering beneath the sun. Margaret found a bench by the shore and sat down, the waves rolling in like whispers against the sand. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. For the first time in many years, she felt completely free. Back at home, Margaret's family returned a week later, sunburned and smiling from their own trip. They expected to find her in her rocking chair, waiting as always. Instead, they found her note on the kitchen table. At first, they were startled, then worried, but as they read her careful handwriting, their surprise softened into something else, respect, even admiration. When Margaret returned 2 days later, carrying her small bag and a seashell she had picked up from the shore, her grandchildren ran to her with wide eyes. "Grandma, where did you go?" "To the ocean," she said simply, her voice calm but steady. "I wanted to see it again." Her children exchanged glances. They had thought she was too old, too fragile, too tired for such things. But standing there, with the sea's wind still clinging to her hair, Margaret looked more alive than she had in years. That night, the family gathered around her as she told them about her journey, the train ride, the little town, the waves breaking on the shore. She spoke slowly, letting them hear the wonder in her voice. Her grandchildren listened wide-eyed, as if she were telling them a fairy tale. Her children listened too, but with something deeper in their expressions, a quiet realization that they had underestimated her spirit. From that day forward, they never told her she was too old again. And Margaret, she continued to take her small journeys, sometimes near, sometimes far, each one reminding her that age could not lock away the heart's longing for adventure. She still loved her rocking chair, still loved the quiet evenings at home. But now she also loved the way the world opened when she stepped beyond her front door. For Margaret had discovered something important. Life does not stop giving you journeys just because you grow older. Sometimes, you only need the courage to take the first step.